Okay, I'm going to get going. Welcome everybody to today's seminar on strategic packaging and labeling, a unified approach from clinical operations to supply chain execution. My name is Bill Coakley from BSMA. And before we get going, I wanted to start with a few housekeeping things. First, a recording of this webinar will be sent to anybody who registered for this event, and it will also be available on BSMI's website. The microphone, video, and chat box has been disabled for attendees. So if you have questions, please don't use the chat box or raise your hand. Down the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A section. So simply type your question in that, and Bob, who's the facilitator of this panel, will direct your questions to the appropriate panelist towards the end of this event. Any feedback for this event will be appreciated. If you care to do so, please email me with your feedback at the email address you see there, bill@biosupplyalliance.com. And lastly, anyone who's welcome to join BSMA in any of our steering committees in workstream groups, you can do so, as well as register for our future events by going on to biosupplyalliance.com. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Bob.
Thank you, Bill, and welcome to the webinar. We're thrilled to have everyone here with us today. It's going to be a great presentation, and I'm anxious to get started. As you can see on the screen, we have a coordination between clinical ops and supply chain. It's been an industry problem for years. Some companies are working it out. We're going to have a good panel discussion with a great group of people that I'm going to introduce here to really see how companies are getting past this and come out with the best processes and the best communication to solve these problems early on. And speaking of panelists, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. I'm your moderator, Bob Albanese. I'm the president of Unified Clinical here in North Carolina. I've been in industry for some time and across various industries for well over 30 years. We have a team of panelists that from across the industry. Representing our vendor selection would be an outside contract packaging and labeling company that does other things, would be Netter Falkenberg, and she's from Califo in Denmark, so she's joining us from quite a distance, and we welcome her with the vendor insight on some of these questions as we go forward. Next slide. Our panelists on sponsor side, manufacturer side, sponsor side, is Joe Ikabuchi. Joe I've known for a number of years. He's well known in the industry, most recently running the clinical supplies team at Moderna pre-COVID and post-COVID, has great insight as to how fast things can change in our world and how to work under high-speed, fast-track development. So I don't think we have a better person to speak to some of those subjects than Joe. We're lucky to have him. Thank you, Joe. Next on the manufacturer supply chain, another longtime colleague, Vince Iola. Vince has been around the block on quite a few things. He has a deep background. I met him when he was working on some stem cell therapies. Real challenges there. The company he was at was a real innovator in that. But he's been in supply chain management on clinical supplies for well into 25 years and brings a lot to the table. And I'm anxious to let Vince share how he and his company, Bausch Health, have made some modifications to the communication between the ClinOps and Clin Supply and streamline some things. So, maybe you can take something from that. Our next panelist is Dawn Wright. Now, Dawn's representing clinical operations, although her role says she's in supply chain and operations. And it's a great diverse background that Dawn brings to the table and some real insight to a company that knows both ClinOps and Clin Supply should be kind of joined at the hip. So we're going to gain a lot of knowledge from what she can bring to the table. And that should be good for slides then, Bill. Okay, thank you. And that's our introductions. I'd like to get right to it. We have some good content for you. So in our first section, we have planning and scheduling. And I'll be talking to each of our panelists and asking for their input, and we'll go through this in a roundabout way. So in ClinOps, so that would be Dawn, what are the key packaging and distribution expectations, considerations you include in the clinical plan? Is there a communication framework and platform between the ClinOps and supply chain to align these expectations?
Yes. Our key focus is on the basics that drive demand. We're interested in the countries, sites, recruitment projections, and the timelines. Those pieces really shape how we plan and when we package supplies. To ensure all the functions are aligned, we have a system that details exactly when the studies are going to start, what countries are going to be included. So that way, all the functions are working to the same information. Another thing we do is we have monthly clinical supply meetings for every project. That way, we ensure that everybody's aligned, and we keep in touch with recruitment. Is recruitment faster than we anticipated or slower? Do we need to make adjustments in the plans based on that?
Thank you, Dawn. Let's move over to the supply chain professionals and the sponsor side. Joe, if I can go to you first, what do you need from ClinOps to plan packaging and distribution effectively?
Wow. Great question, Bob. The kitchen sink, I guess I would say, right? So as much information as we could get as early as possible. I think Dawn mentioned enrollment, synopsis, a summary, anything we can get, regions, treatment groups or cohorts, literally starting the communication as early as possible really kind of, how do you say, greases the gears and gets us moving in the right direction, right? Because the momentum starts, right? I'm already starting to palpitate, right? The momentum starts for that study. So literally as much info as possible.
Thanks, Joe. And then Vince, if two things here. One, if you can add to what Joe said, anything unique, but I'm going to leverage you a little bit more and ask you, what about when you don't get what you need?
Oh, we don't get what we need. I pitch a fit. So I think to add on to my colleagues, yeah, site activation plans, enrollment rates. We look for everything. As Joe said, the kitchen sink. We want everything. We know we're not going to get all of that information at once, but we do ask for those things to a country list. Even if it's a wish list, there's a startup times for countries, so we need to know that as well as we're planning for our rollout of supply. So that. Yeah, anything and everything as early as possible. I think that's sums it up.
Can I just add one thing, Bob, for a
Sure.
second? Is real fast. Sometimes there's the official information, like the official enrollment, what we got from the CRO, what got filtered. But then there's the hallway talk, and that hallway talk is just so important, right? It may not be in minutes, but I've been involved with things. The enrollment was kind of straight across, but then the real enrollment was like a hockey stick and a blast off, right? And if we hadn't planned for that, we would have run out of drug. And that again was more I want to say the hallway talk that ClinOps really wanted to go gangbusters, but I don't know, maybe Dawn could add to that. But, we see different things sometimes, right?
Thanks, Joe. And then either of you can come back in with maybe because you both have great live examples in your life. What happened when you didn't get the information, and what were some of the problems that it caused to the study and the patients?
Well, I mean, the information that we get is correct for that moment. right? And a month from now, 6 months from now, that can change. Lots can change, and we have to be nimble enough that we can make those changes, right? We try to have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and then a backup plan D, right? We're always thinking of all the different scenarios and things that could possibly go wrong. We have to be pessimists in our planning, in to be able to change directions when things don't go, or if we don't have information. We have to make a lot of assumptions. That's something that we make known to the clinical team. This is correct, and this is what it is at this moment. And if anything should change, these are the assumptions that we used at that time. So it's kind of your baseline, and then at the next point you reevaluate.
Okay, thanks, Vince. And Netter, when I come back to you on this same thing, as a vendor, you play quite a different role, but an important role. How would you prefer the sponsor communicate changes with you to help prevent any waste or delays?
Yeah, I can only repeat, any changes must be communicated as fast as possible. And so it's very important to have a meeting very frequently. And any updates, even though that it might seem as non-important updates to the sponsor or to my customer, it's very important for me to know, because it could have a huge impact on all my planning. So, and I would like to go a little bit one step backwards, because I actually need a final protocol before I can really start my work. That is never the case. So I will need a very, very, very drafted protocol in order for me to start my work with the trial design, with kind of products that are included in this specific trial. Because before I have that, I cannot plan anything. It could be subject to change over the time. So I need a little bit more specific before I can start my planning. Otherwise, it will cost too much for the customer.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our next topic here, pre-packaging decisions. So I know this really varies by role. So let me start with the supply chain guys, from the sponsor side first. What drives the decision around packaging format? So Vince, if you could head this off, and then we'll follow up with Joe.
Sure. So I think the first thing is who is the end user? Is this a child? Is it being dosed in clinic? We need to know that, because that's going to determine packaging, right? If it's in clinic, the labels as well, labeling can change. So storage, is it stored at a small clinical site's closet somewhere, or is it being stored in the research pharmacy? So all of that plays into how we design the product packaging, I should say.
Thank you. And Joe, can you add here for me?
Yeah, I would just add there's also communication with the sites too, right? So my products were heavily cold chain, and so we were shipping at -70, right? But then once it got to the site, it would be stored at 2 to 8. So that handoff and that communicating that handoff, because they're seeing shippers coming in at -70, but we don't want them to put them in a freezer or an ultra freezer, right? We need it to get in a refrigerator. So, like, how do you do that? How do you train folks and identify things to work, the proper way, right? So, to Vince's point, we are huge pessimists or huge worriers, and do I need fluorescent labels to tell people things in the pharmacy manual? It's that we're talking supply chain, right? The weakest link causes a problem, right? I'm just throwing that as an example, right? Turning off those temp tails or temperature monitors. How to do that? You can't assume a super trained person is going to receive that package, right?
Mm.
So it's kind of fascinating.
Thank you. And Netter, I'll come back to you. Could
Mm.
you share some examples of creative packaging solutions you've used throughout the
Yeah,
year?
yeah, definitely I can. We once had a very, very small plastic unit dose that needs to be blinded. The active ingredients was slightly yellow and the placebo was colorless. So we actually created a kind of a double label, mirrored label that covered the plastic unit totally. So it was wrapped around the unit and was closed all the way around, so you couldn't see the unit inside. I have another example where a plastic cap were created for a while because the active ingredients were lyophilized powder, whereas the placebo was actually an empty vial. So we create, or a plastic cap were created that we could put around the vial itself, where to the label were attached. We created a round label that was placed on the bottom of the vial in order not to see if there was something in the vial or not, because the lyophilized powder needs to be, water needs to be added to that. So both vials were added water for injection, and therefore you could not see if it was empty or not from the beginning. A third example is I have a trial where we have intra-subject randomization, meaning that one subject will receive both placebo and active. So two packaging lists, so to speak, were created, one with a green label, one with a colored label, and one with a white label. And both lists contains active and placebo, and the subject were randomized to start either with the active, and then that was treatment one, and then was obviously you need to go to the placebo with treatment as a treatment two, and maybe the other way around. So all treatments were with a colored label, all treatment one was with a colored label, and all treatment two were with a white label, but both contains active and placebo. And if I could add that for pre-packaging from a supply perspective also, the trial design itself is also very important, because it defines or categorize whether the products could be an IMP or simplify IMP or maybe not. And I very often meet that question, that people think it's maybe not an IMP or it's just a marketed product or whatever. And actually, when you look at the trial design, it's actually categorized as an IMP, and that defines also the label further on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Netter.
You're welcome.
Dawn, coming around to ClinOps, how does patient experience or protocol affect packaging formats when you're in ClinOps and designing these trials?
Yeah. From the ClinOps perspective, that's what I'm thinking about, the patient experience. How are the patients taking the product home? How are they storing it? I'm thinking about the sites, how the sites are going to store the product. I actually have an example of a recent case where we were doing an early phase study, and they had manufactured 100 milligram tablets. And it was a dose rising study, and the product the dose could potentially go up to 1,600 milligrams BID, which would have been 32 tablets a day. Turned out that the packaging, the patient would have been required to take home 26 bottles with them for their month supply. Luckily, the dose didn't go that high. It wasn't BID, so we didn't have to worry about that. But it's really important to think about what that patient experience is going to be like. And you might have to rethink your formulation. You may have to rethink your packaging. But it's really important, because otherwise we would have had to send giant bags for these patients to take their drug home.
Thank you. And for the entire group, I'll leave this out for whoever can grab it, or you can all go into it. What are you doing as you plan this in your departments to mitigate waste and overages without running out of supply, of course? We see a lot of overage in our industry and a lot of waste, whether it be in the actual drug product, the INP, or the comparator, the co-meds, all costly and not as costly as losing enrollment because you don't have enough. But how are you dealing with not having too much and making sure it's packaged for the right protocol?
Can I jump
Yeah,
in?
we. Oh,
Go ahead,
go ahead,
Vince.
Joe.
Go ahead, Joe.
All right, I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things we always looked at is, can we pool the supplies, right? Can we use our materials across various protocols, right? So that's one way to be more efficient. And that also comes down to labeling, right? So our partner is ClinOps, or my customer is ClinOps, but I also wanted to explain the ClinOps ramifications, right? So if we were going to run a study, like a vaccine study in the winter in the northern hemisphere, and then switch to the southern hemisphere, when their time of the year comes. If I put on the label northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, now I lock those supplies into a region, right? So if I, it was just a conversation and negotiation. I don't even want to call it a negotiation, but just to explain, if we do northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere on the labels, then I'm locked in and I can't move this material, right? So it's just, again, thinking, how can I pull those supplies and use them across everything? People, I used to have hair, right? But clinical supplies did this to me. During COVID, you would think I would have had enough vials. We never had enough drug during COVID trials, right? So we were always razzle dazzling some way to get things through, right? Vince, you're up.
Thanks. Go ahead, Vince.
So yeah, no, I'll echo what Joe said. We'll do the same. We'll keep more in bright stock, and we're careful about putting very specific information that does lock you into a region or in anything of that sort. It's hard because you look at also, well, can I package in 2 or 3 runs rather than one larger run, right? You'll weigh out the cost of running multiple operations. What's the risk of spending more but having the ability to withhold some of that product from being labeled? So it varies. It depends on the study, but those are the type of things that we'll look at and we'll evaluate.
Dawn, anything to add from the ClinOps side, or is it not a concern?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't necessarily from the ClinOps side, but we have a system that we use, forecasting system. So it really allows us to react to changes in recruitment, decrease packaging, labeling, in response to recruitment. But we also, at times, will do pooled supplies, like Joe mentioned, along with just-in-time labeling, which really allows us a lot of flexibility.
Thank you. And then Netter, anything to add to this question?
No, I was also thinking about just-in-time labeling and also very close communication with the recruitment people, and and not pack everything from the beginning.
Thank you.
So
Thank
Bob,
you all.
if I
Yeah.
can throw in there, so and I didn't mention it earlier, I'm in a lucky situation, I guess, that I'm part of ClinOps. So my team and we report directly into the head of ClinOps as well. So we get information on a weekly basis. We're part of their kickoff meetings. We attend clinical study meetings, although it might seem a lot of that information is, I don't want to say unnecessary, but for what we're doing on a day to day, right? But we get a lot of that information, and we can use that to, again, as we're evaluating our strategies.
So, to use Joe's words, you're getting some of that hallway discussion then because you're in there. That's
we,
great.
we are right. What water cooler talk, right? We
Yeah.
lose a lot of that, and in this day and age, with a lot of people working remotely, those conversations you have when you meet up in the cafeteria or in the elevator, right? They don't happen as much. So we have to take advantage of what we're given, and we're lucky enough that we are invited and are participating in a lot of the meetings. And again, we can take it or not, but it helps us.
So Vince, if I could just push back on you a little bit to expand. You've worked at, a few places in your life. Think of a company where you had the supply chain role that didn't allow you in the ClinOps meeting, and tell me if your current position, your current configuration is that much more beneficial.
So sure. So I've worked at other companies where we were part of CMC. We were part of pharmaceutical technology, right? There's different names, but for the most part, it was the CMC or R&D groups, which is great for getting the information right upstream and learning about where my product is in the manufacturing stages and whatnot. But having my role now being part of the clinical operations group, if I had to pick, and with all due respect to my CMC colleagues, I would pick the clinical operations. If there's something goes wrong with coding, right, I want to know that, because what is the impact of my timeline? But I'm not the one that's fixing that. My CMC colleagues are doing that. If something is adding sites or adding countries, that directly affects what I'm doing at this moment, because I need to adjust how much supply I have out in the depots and whatnot. So I get more information that I use on a regular basis than I would if I was part of the other group. But it's a great learning, because you do get to find out more about what's upstream.
Yeah.
But I
Thanks,
will
Vince.
have to say, ClinOps.
Let's move on to the next section, which is packaging, execution, and batch records. Netter, I'd like to start with you. What processes, technology, communication platform ensures that batch records are right the first time?
Meetings, project plans, standard timelines from us to the customer, information as soon as possible, and we have systems that could retrieve, general the information in order to avoid repetitions. So you key in all the general information, and you could pull that out, so our customer could actually approve some information at a very early stage, so the batch record can be generated without going back to the customer for simple questions, so to speak. And also, if system can talk together, so we can pull out all the information keyed in from the retrieving the products, that will be the best thing. And also have system where you can actually generate the batch record, you can review it, and also approve it in the same closed system, so to speak. Control as well, yeah.
So, Netter, if I could just have an add-on question for you, and you may not have any. Is there an example of when you didn't have the right information, that it actually caused a batch record to fail? It couldn't get reproved, which means the product wasn't released and you had to go back over. You've told us what you need to get it right the first time. Has it ever happened where you didn't get it right the first time because you didn't get what you needed?
I cannot. In general, it's very often a question about how much to pack. It could be also a question about the countries in question. So if we need to have a packaging including a booklet, or it needs to be country-specific packaging, which costs more waste. So I cannot come up with a specific example, but we do see that from the very, very beginning. And also, from my perspective, it's also very important to use, approved templates and approved forms, so everything is very easy to trace and go back to.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. It just popped in my head.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So let's go to Joe. What operational and regulatory hurdles do your teams face when expanding a study to include a new country?
Wow. We would work very closely with our regulatory groups, obviously, to see um, what we have to do or what we can't do for that country. If our drug is actually approved to go to that country, right? For a green light process, work with our QPs, and then we have to look again, can we go to that country with the label we have, right? One of the things I think all of us maybe have been involved in is if we can get the worst case for the country, like the worst case list for the countries, I can have a booklet label that's already done with those potential countries, right? Versus now we add a country that we thought we might add, but no one told me we might add. So now we don't have a label for that, right? We have to do more packaging, right? So it's not just the regulatory, but it's also the operational work that we might have been able to sidestep.
And Joe, just to poke in there a little bit more on what you said about getting all the countries in the booklet
Yeah.
label, is there some point you have to weigh out the timeline if there's a country that's really difficult to get the labeling done, where you're holding the entire booklet up now?
Yeah, we've had a couple companies ago some interesting scenarios with the Middle East, right? And what countries can be in that booklet label because
They're not
for
friends.
whatever reason, certain countries don't like each other. So, I can't, whatever it was, Lebanon couldn't be with Israel on the
Israel.
label, right? And it just a funny story real fast was meeting after meeting we're going to add Lebanon, so everyone was like, we'll create another booklet label with all the countries but not Israel, but with Lebanon, right? And then another booklet label, kind of the reverse. And that was going to cost like $800,000, right? And I'm like, how many sites are in Lebanon? And it was like, Vince is laughing, I could say. There were like 2 Lebanon sites, right? And I was just a visitor to this meeting, and I was like, let's just do single panel label for Lebanon. And, sometimes people get in this whole hang up of the booklet labels and not having specific packaging runs for a country. But really? Like that turned out to be like $20,000 instead of $800,000, right? So you got to think of those things.
Yeah, we had the same thing. We had Egypt and Lebanon, and neither one could share the booklet with Israel, and we had a
Right.
separate little 2 page for that country, for those 2 countries.
So Vince, what else
Unfortunately,
do you
that's
have
how
to
it
add
happens.
for this
Uh,
subject, as Joe has already done?
so no, I mean, I think he really hit the nail on the head. I'll throw in stability, so shelf life. You can run into a situation where you have a country that just doesn't like what was put forth in the stability, and doesn't agree that you've extended it to, let's say, 48 months, and they're going, no, we're only going to accept your 36. So now you run into the situation where your expiry updating, right? Because you're doing that on the booklets, and you can't do that for that particular country. So you have to come up with now a separate labeling campaign, or hope the regulatory and colleagues, CMC colleagues, can find a way to change that. But that does happen. So you have to be prepared and for that type of situation where just for whatever reasons they don't agree with the stability data.
So, while I have you two guys on the phone here, do you have a preference over electronic or paper batch records? Speaking to, Netter's solutions.
Uh, I'll say electronic. Um, if you've ever had to read through a paper based um, primary run where it's weight based for, let's say, 15 different drug types, it can get pretty ugly when there's mistakes and crossouts and etc. So yeah, I prefer the electronic. I know that's not always possible, but that's a personal preference.
Yeah.
And by electronic, you mean fully executed electronically, not just the paper is a PDF.
Correct. I don't mean just a PDF copy. I mean just an actual electronic batch records. Right? They're automated. They're time stamped. You know.
Yep.
But yeah, when there's corrections, it's a lot easier to read through than if they send you a PDF where you can't make out what anything was written.
Yeah. And Joe, Netta, go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
And no, if it's fully electronic, I think it's very, very important that you have a very good and logical folder structure, because otherwise it's a mess. And I have tried that. Everything is electronic, but it's maybe logical for the people who created it, but it's not logical for anybody else. So
that's a good point there. You know, we see that in software all the time. The developer said, "I know how to do this," and the user said, "I have no idea how to use it."
No, exactly. Yeah. So can I add something to to if we added an additional country? In addition to a new label and translation, regulatory approval, and all these things, and maybe a specific country packaging design, it could also be if the customer at a country where it's not that easy to import the drug into, so you maybe need to put up a depot in order not to have an import license every time you ship the drug. So, and that could potentially take a long time before you have all the documentation ready for that depot. And also maybe, for instance, the UK, where everything needs to be approved before it has passed into the UK. So that is also something you need to consider.
Thank you. Joe, I didn't let you get to talk a little bit yet about your preference on electronic or paper batch records.
No, I'll agree with Vince for sure. Electronic, if it works, if it has the flexibility that's needed, which moves us down the road of having a really good partnership with our vendors, right? And working with our vendors to get that batch record to work well with what we're working with at our sponsor company, right? Ultimate goal, I think all of us have tried to do this, is where we can qualify our vendor or qualify those batch records to the point where maybe we're not even reviewing them all, right? Mm-hmm. We're randomly spot checking some of those batch records. We needed specific things like photographs in our batch records. So that's something we have to work with. Another issue I came across was, and I want to make sure I'm using the right term, but the business management system or environmental management system at the vendor in concert with those batch records, right? My product was stored at -70. We were going to package it ambient, but it could only stay at ambient so many days. Then it had to go to -40 for so many days. Then -70. Then -20, and ship to the sites at -20. That is crazy, right? Multiple intense workshops to figure out how that was going to work, right? And that's because, and I think Vince talked about stability, right? That was mRNA. We're still learning mRNA. That was 5 years ago. And those are the things we had to do, right? There's a lot, right? Even I happened to be at a vendor on a Friday. They were going to move my vials back to the I'm going to call it the warehouse, basically for security. And I was like, you can't move unfrozen mRNA vials out of this room because I can't have them vibrated or shaken, right? Just crazy things that you would never think about, right? So that whether that's in the batch record or that's in a procedure, how are you going to handle your drugs? Because our drugs are getting more and more intense, I guess. Very cool stuff,
So,
right?
so Joe, that's a really unique example about the step down on the temperatures. Um, so if I could just ask, did that need to be recorded through the batch record? Because I guess that you can't
Mm.
release it if it's not at the right temperature. So was there no release on the
all
product until final
all
temperature?
that data had to be in the batch record. Those vials were kept here for this many hours and then moved here and then moved here. And it
So
was it was all about refreezing the mRNA vials.
mhm.
Had to go to a very cold temperature before it could go to -20 to truly refreeze, right? And you can't take 30,000 vials and stick them in -70 freezers because you're gonna have excursions in those freezers, right?
Mm.
So we moved them into -40 walk-ins for so many days, and then they went to a -70, right? It was really, you know, it was working with the vendor, working with our tech ops folks and ourselves, coming up with a creative way to do this.
great,
Right?
thanks, Joe. And before I go to Dawn, I just want to remind the audience to use your Q&A button to put your questions in. We're coming up on the time to start doing questions. I'd like to have some in there. We appreciate it. And back to you, Dawn. When the guys are talking about batch records, electronic, and in the clean ops side, do you use like something like a RACI for supply chain mitigation, packaging delays and changes? Like what's the ClinOps doing to track this or try to mitigate things from even happening with the amount of changes we see here?
Yeah, yeah. So I think a RACI is valuable. It's important to know like who to contact when there is a change that's coming for sure. But I think even just as important is for the Clinics ops team to understand what those things are that will lead to packaging delays. What are the changes that are going to change the labels? Or slow down the packaging for any reason. If they understand that, so, adding a new cohort, adding a new country, a cohort with a comparator, those things that are going to delay the timelines, it's important for them to understand what those things are. And once they do, then we can avoid those ripple effects.
Thank you. So in the last section, cross-department communication, and I think this was the crux of what we were trying to get to here for our audience. And this is going to be the same question for everyone on this, so you can think about it. How can early engagement and communication between clinical operations and clinical supply support achieving overcoming common challenges you might occur during clinical trial packaging operations? And I know that's a mouthful, so Dawn, let me start with you again on this.
Sure. So one of the biggest barriers is feasibility. Feasibility can take a lot longer than expected, right? So when these country decisions aren't finalized, it can hold up packaging and labeling. So what we like to do is plan for worst case. So I think it's really important to ask the question the right way to the teams. Ask them, okay, if recruitment isn't where you want it to be, what countries will you go to next? So
Mm.
try to get to the what's behind, what's the next level plan, because they might have it in their mind, but might not have it on paper. So if you can get that information early and include those on the labels, especially if you're using a booklet label, then you can avoid having to add those countries later. Another idea is to go with just-in-time labeling, because if you can do that, that adds that flexibility, and it reduces the startup time.
Thanks, Dawn. Joe, let's go to you on this. Same question.
Oh, gosh. Communication is just the most important thing, right? So we would host meetings with our cross-functional teams, right?
Mhm.
They were hosted by clinical supplies. We would try to have every cross-functional team that was involved with those projects at those meetings and keep minutes and make sure everyone was on the same page, right? So that was tech dev, clinical development, clin ops, ourselves, QA, regulatory, everyone there to make sure that communication flow was the best it possibly could be. So that, again, those worst case scenarios, right? The countries change, study, sometimes there's a delay in the study, and I'm dealing with expiry issues, right? So,
Mhm.
and any kind of, sand thrown in the gears, right? That we could talk about ahead of time, the what ifs, the what ifs, the what ifs. Then when something actually happens, we're not caught off guard as much, right? Um, so those are the things we would do.
Thanks. And I see Vince has rejoined us. His camera now works.
I don't know what happened.
If you could
Just died.
expand on this with us, Vince?
So I'll agree with what was said. I think if you can get all key players and all key groups together to understand and define that the global strategy, right? What is the strategy for that particular study? And also, especially when it comes to the CRO, in the past, clinical supplies, in my own experience, we typically didn't sit in on the CRO kickoff meeting. Um, we would usually kind of chime in or dial in when they were ready to speak IP stuff, related stuff. But now we sit in on that entire meeting, so we hear a lot more. So there's a lot more information that we're getting at the very start, and what the plans are with the actual study from the CRO's perspective as they're planning, and that really has helped, in my opinion, to do our job just that much better. Because now we're getting all of that information. Again, it's information.
Thank you. And Netter, what do you have to add to this from your
Um, yeah, I totally agree, but I also sometimes encounter that my customer does not always know what they don't know. So it's
Mhm.
very important for me to be involved in a very early stage in order to help them and to challenge if they have you thought about this and that. I have for me a very good example that once I had a customer. They have always packed 10 vials in a box, and they want to do that. They have more than 20 sites. And after that, they told me that their bulk size was only maybe 180 vials per batch, per batch. So we have to redesign the packaging design, and 10 vials in a pack in carton was not necessary because they only need 6 vials. But nobody has calculated that, how many vials was needed for a treatment and how many subjects per site was expected, and so on. And with a very small batch size and a pack designed with 10 vials in a box, it could not be created.
Yeah.
So, and they haven't thought about it, and very often they don't know what they don't know.
Mhm. That's a very good point from the vendor side, and I really appreciate it.
So
That
we definitely need to be involved very early.
Yeah, that concludes our questions for the panelists. Now we're going to go to questions from the audience. Um, One I see here, and Joe, I think you're kind of stuck with this one. What is the checklist for the kitchen sink?
Oh my God.
You open that Pandora's box.
You don't have enough money to pay me for that check. Okay. No, just kidding. You know, it depends what area you're looking at too, right? So if I'm working with ClinOps, I'm asking certain questions about number of countries, right? Number of regions, number of countries. What are the countries, right? What is your patient population? Worst case. Do you think there's a potential we might expand that, right? You know, if things don't go along the way we want, we might want to expand that. Um, what is that enrollment rate? We've talked about that multiple times, right? So working with ClinOps on their side, right? But then there's also the pack and label side, like, what I'm more used to, the operational side. So are we going to package just one large packaging job and be efficient? Or are we going to package multiple packaging jobs over a 2-year period? What's the therapeutic area of the study? Am I running a vaccine for infectious disease that we might do 30,000 patients in 2 months? Well, you're not going to have multiple packaging jobs, right? Am I doing rare disease or oncology where it might be much slower enrollment, where I might do multiple small packaging jobs, right? So those are all those kind of things. I do mean the kitchen sink, right?
Yeah.
But it's almost like over time, you just keep making bullets of all the things you have to deal with, right? Whether it's the labels, working with our vendors, we would have meetings just with the distribution folks at our partners, right? At our partner facility, because we wanted insight from them, right? Maybe we're shipping Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, but now we have 3 studies that are going to end up, one study gets pulled in, one study gets pulled out. Now we got 3 studies at the same time. Everyone wants their study, everyone owns their own study, right? So they want their study to go first. We got to make sure we work with our partner to make sure this is all going to flow right, right? So just working on distribution, that's a whole kitchen sink and a
Yeah.
checklist in itself, right?
Thanks, Joe. I want to get to the next question that came in, and it's a little bit from the other side. So this is from a cold chain packaging representative, where we actually put the stuff in. And it's a great question. I don't know if you have the answers or you can add to it. What's missing from the temp control package or secting that could support some of the challenges you discussed when supporting different countries and their temp control needs? What is the solution broad enough out there for you guys, or do you need more? Vince, I'll let you go first.
A good question.
Uh,
Yeah.
Anybody else want to jump in while Vince is thinking?
I
Let me
not
just
sure.
jump in for a second. I don't think we have a true end-to-end solution for
Yeah.
cold chain. Okay, that's what I saw. Maybe I was in an unfortunate bad spot a few years ago, right? But we had literally thousands of temperature excursions, not hundreds, thousands, right? All our partners say they're experts at cold chain, but that's not what I saw. I saw we were good at cold chain, but not great at cold chain, right? There were issues with temperature excursions at pack out, bizarre in transit excursions, and then excursions at the sites. Never mind if things got stuck at customs, right?
Yeah.
So I think true cold chain there's a lot of opportunity. I'm going to leave it as a positive, right? A huge opportunity to get all the partners together, right? That's, the folks doing the shipper boxes, the temperature monitors, our vendor partners, everyone together to make this a lot better. But it's hard, right? Maybe we need a webinar on this. Okay.
Here you go.
So,
Anything to
Bob, if I
add?
can,
Okay.
if
Go
I can
ahead, Bill.
chime in there. So I'm just thinking back to my stem cell days. We had a lot of excursions as well, and many of them we found out were transient spikes. When the plane would land, it would impact the liquid nitrogen vapor dewars. We started looking at real time data to be able to foresee those and be able to get another shipment out. But the cost was quite significant at the time. Our shippers were validated for at minimum 10 days, so we knew we can get something somewhere within 3 to 4, but they were fully validated to hold up to the 10 days. Some of the shipping cartons, I know they're a few days. It'd be nice to have at least 5 when there are some shipping delays, and I do like the real time temp monitoring to be able to adjust on the fly. The problem that we usually have is justifying that cost with upper management. That's usually where things get stalled.
Thank you. Netter?
Yeah, I just want to add that actually we don't see that many temperature excursion during shipment, almost none. But what we see is temperature excursions at site, and that is very, very often due to the fact that the site is not trained well enough. So they don't know very simple things. What is the time slot for an open refrigerator or the freezer or whatever? The things is not placed in a good order in at the storage room, so they have to use a lot of time in order to find the correct kit number for the package to allocate to the subject and so on. So that is at the very, very end of the cold chain start. So that's what we see.
So that was a great question from whoever put that in. We appreciate it. And Dawn, if you could give me your input on the same question.
Yeah, I mean, as far as temperature excursions go, yeah, we have them pretty frequently here and there. So random things happen, and we have temperature excursions and we deal with them. I mean, luckily we don't have any products that are severely impacted by temperature excursions, so it's not as big of a deal for us. So
Yeah.
I
So
wanted
that
to go
brings
back
us.
to a quick question or a quick thing about
Sure.
communication. And I know this whole thing is about communicating. And there's a point that I wanted to bring up, and I think it's really important to educate people about how long it takes to pack supplies, how long it takes to manufacture. I can say that we've been on sort of a campaign, kind of going around to different groups within the company to share how we work, how long it takes. They have no idea sometimes, these teams. And if you're finding that you're having trouble with getting information, it might simply be time to have a session, a lunch and learn. You could have a lunch and learn and share, what you do and why it takes so long. So I just wanted to share that because I think it's really important.
Really glad you did, Dawn. And in listening to you, I come back to the beginning of this webinar. We have a problem statement. We're looking for a solution, and I can't agree with you more that it's education. While communication is important, and you can't be without it, what are you communicating? And if it's educational communication, as you said, an informed customers are best customers. So, I believe you're right there. So that brings us to the top of the hour. Any closing remarks from our host, Bill?
Yeah, thanks again for handing it off. And thank you to all the speakers for all their great insights. I wanted to remind people, as I said at the beginning of the event, that this event was recorded, and anybody who registered for the event will receive a copy of the recording, probably sometime next week. And you can also find a copy of the recording at our website, BSMA's website. And last but not least, wanted to inform everybody about BSMA's 18th annual summit in Foster City, California, which is near San Francisco Airport. You can learn more about this event and register for this event at BSMA's website. And also, if anybody's interested in joining BSMA's steering committees or work stream groups, you can do that online at BSMA as well. So without further ado, thank you again, and signing off.
Thank you. And thank you to all our panelists. You were great. Thanks for hosting
Thank
this,
you.
Bill.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.